Today is May 15th, 2008. I am Eric Michnick, and it is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Ashley, North Dakota. Can you please state your full name, please?
Orion, Rudolph. Middle name is Arlen.
Okay. And when and where were you born?
I was born in Logan County, rural Fredonia, in Yankee Township.
Okay. Have you ever heard an interesting story about your birth?
No, I sure have not.
Okay. Was there a doctor or a midwife present?
That I don't know. I have no idea of that.
Okay. If you could you please share some of your earliest memories with us?
Oh gosh. I remember walking to grade school, and I remember my sister being my first grade teacher. Prior to that, or maybe even during that time, I recall when my mom was sick, my dad and mom and my grandmother on my mother's side and we made a lengthy trip to Aberdeen, South Dakota to see an eye doctor named Dr. Rudolph. I remember we had a flat tire on the way to Aberdeen, and apparently the spare tire that Dad had, and maybe there was a flat tire before that, which I don't recall, but anyway, this flat tire we had in the Frederick area. Dad hitched a ride with someone to Frederick, and it took forever, it seemed. And when he came back, he had a tire which was about as bald as an inner tube. Grandma made mention to that. She said, "Well, that tire's no good." He said, "Well, that's all they had." And lo and behold, that took us to Aberdeen and took us back home.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit about your grandparents on your mother's side?
On my mother's side, Grandpa, he died before I was born. Grandma, we got to go to Grandma's house periodically. She lived on the farm, which was only about 2 miles north from where we lived at, which was, not walking distance for kids especially. Later on, she moved to Gackle, North Dakota, and of course then the visits were much less. But she did go along with us to Aberdeen. She was concerned about her daughter, which my mother, of course.
Okay. And what were their names?
Grandma was Christina. Maiden name was Spidell. Of course, Grandpa's name was Carl Schlecht. That's on my mother's side.
Okay. What type of person was your grandmother?
Well, she spoke German all the time. She didn't speak English, as I recall. She was kind of a small lady. To a child, she was an authority. We did what she told. We were told to keep quiet. We kept quiet.
Okay. Did those sets of grandparents come over from Russia?
Grandpa did, but not Grandma. She was born in this country.
And do you know where Grandpa was, where he was from in Russia?
Not right off the cuff. I think I've got that in my family history books, which I can look up.
What did they do for a living when you were growing up?
My grandparents? They were farmers. They farmed cattle and small grains, ducks, geese, chickens, whatever.
And how far did they live away from you?
They lived about 2 miles.
Okay. How often did you visit your grandparents, or how often did they visit you?
Well, I don't know. As a young child, I don't recall that they were there every week or not, but they probably were, and I just don't recall that. But I'm sure there was, being 2 miles away, chances are pretty good that it was probably a once a week thing, or maybe twice a week, or once every 2 weeks, who knows.
And how many children did they have?
On my grandmother's side? Oh, golly. There was a bunch of uncles and aunts, and they're all gone already. I couldn't tell you right off the handle. I'd have to look that up. I would say if I would guess 10, I'd probably be pretty close.
Okay. How about your grandparents on your father's side? What were their names?
Okay, grandfather's side, Peter Sr. Rudolph. And grandmother was Katharina Walth, W-A-L-T-H.
Okay.
And of course, then there was a step-grandma. Her name was Katharina. Can't tell you off the cuff now. What in the world is it? I'd have to look that up. I've got that in my family records too.
Okay.
I should have my family record book here in front of me. I could get you right down to it.
Okay. And what type of person was your grandmother on that side?
She passed away in 1917. I wasn't even born at that time. And same thing with Grandpa. He died before I was born.
Okay. Could you tell us about some of your aunts and uncles from either side of your family?
Okay, on my mother's side, Uncle Ernest, he lived about a mile west of where Grandma and Grandpa lived at. There's 2 boys and a girl, which are my cousins. They farmed. He was a grain farmer. He didn't do any cattle or livestock. He was just totally a grain farmer. He did well for himself. Another uncle of mine on my mother's side was Art Schlecht. As I recall, in his early years, he did some automotive repair at the junction of 281 and Highway 46 south of Jamestown. He and another fellow, I don't remember what the other fellow's name is, but that's where I started remembering of him. And he wasn't there all that long. And then he moved out to Battleground, Oregon. And that's where he established himself and had additional children, cousins of mine. In fact, he just passed away here about a year ago now. And his wife, she's pretty sick, and wouldn't surprise me to have a phone call one day that she'll be passing away. There's an aunt of mine who is named Elsie, married to Stanley Weir. He passed away, and then she got married to, can't think of his last name now. It's a common name too. But anyway, this Elsie, she passed away here about a year ago now too. Then there was Emma. She was an aunt. They didn't have any children. Married to Eddie Hain. They lived south of Gackle. Both of them have already passed away. Hilbert, who was the youngest of the ones, passed away about, I'd say maybe about a year and a half ago. He was out in Everett, Washington. And there's, of course, my mother. My mother was the oldest one of the family. There was, her name was Ottilie. There was a Catherine, and there was a Alma. Gosh, there's another one. What the world was her name? Of course, they're all passed away already. Alma, she died when I was in the service and back in the 60s. They lived in Lemoore. And then let's see, let's go to my dad's side. There is Uncle Henry. He was the oldest. He lived out in Billings, Montana area. Then there is Caroline. She was in Missoula, married to Ed Martin. And there is Christine, married to Jacob Schlecht. Dorothy, she was married 4 times. And after her 4th marriage, then her husband passed away, and then she was the last one left. No, I'm sorry. Let me turn that around. She passed away, and then her husband passed away. So he was the last one that outlived them all. Of course, my dad, Fred, and then there was John and Jake. John lived in Allendale, in Jamestown. No, I take that back. Edgeley. Between Edgeley and Cullum, John. And Jacob lived in Billings, Montana. He was the youngest one of the bunch. He was born in this country. All the rest of them were born overseas.
Okay.
And of course, Grandpa, he homesteaded ground north of Venanda, Montana. Somewhere is about 20-some miles north of Montana there in no man's land. And of course, that's where he's buried at. So is Grandma.
Okay. How often did these aunts and uncles visit?
While I was working with the genealogy stuff, the cousins that are alive, and of course me hunting down information, most of the cousins that are in Montana, jokingly, we kind of come to the conclusion there are the Montana cousins and there are the North Dakota cousins. And because of the distance being so far, the aunts and uncles of mine, of course, travel in those days was not very often. So we really didn't get to know the cousins like we know the cousins here locally. But yeah, in name we know, yeah, cousin so-and-so and cousin so-and-so. So there's a bunch of them out in Montana especially. Most of them are retired. There's some that have passed away already. The rest of the cousins are in the Fredonia and Ashley areas. Okay. Edgeley, Wahpeton.
Did you have a favorite aunt or uncle?
No, not really. They were all, I liked them all, those. You know.
Okay. You mentioned your many cousins. Could you tell us a little bit about all of your cousins?
Well, the local ones I can tell you. I know them. We visit with each other and get to see each other at different family functions and so on. Whereas you get into the Montana cousins, we don't know them other than name. And of course, now being I was working on the family histories, I got to visit with them on the telephone. You tell who you are, and so they don't hang up, and you're thinking that you're a salesman of some sort, and you visit with them. And my dad is your Uncle Fred, and oh yeah, okay, oh yeah, we know, yeah. So you get to visit with them that way. But real close visiting or knowing them, that I don't. The Montana ones especially. There's a few of them that I converse with periodically on the phone because of this history thing, but a lot of them not. And then there's a lot of them that have passed away already too.
Okay. Could you tell us about your father?
My father. Well, I recall that I never seen him with any other hair than white hair. Although my older sisters and brother, they tell me that, oh yeah, Daddy had darker hair when he was young. And they also tell me that in his early years that he smoked, which I never ever saw him smoke. And he was a short person, a little chubby, kind of a quiet person. He wasn't an outgoing person. My mother was the one that was more so the family leader, patriarch or so, that kind of a thing. But she decided that's what they did. If they decided to go to town today, they went to town. Dad didn't do that type of thing. If they decided to buy some properties or land or something, it wasn't Dad, it was her. She made the decision. If she saw a piece of land that she thought would be good for the family, she was the one, the leader to do that type of thing. And then after Mom passed away, well, then everything came kind of to a standstill.
Okay. Where and when was he born?
He was born I'm thinking it's Odessa, Russia, but I'm not 100% positive. But they were all born over in the other country. I've got that stuff all in my history books. I should know that, but I don't. Too many other things to remember.
How did your father express his emotions, such as fear, love, or anger?
Fear, love, and anger. He was pretty firm in his words, when he spoke, when you were supposed to be doing something. When he, told you to, in our case, when Mom passed away in 1947, and he never remarried, and he was the house lady, so to speak, and if you were told to take the garbage out, told to sweep this floor or whatever, you did it. For fear if you didn't, you got swatted. He only told you once or twice. You knew what door to move.
Okay. Could you describe your relationship with your father?
If I compare my relationship to some other kids' relationships, I could say that my relationship with my dad wasn't really a very warm relationship, like some people's children that I know of. Some people's kids, the dads, they would go along with them to the baseball games and this and that. My dad didn't do that.
Okay. And what was his profession?
He was farming. We were farmers.
How did your father cope during the hard times?
Well, the hard times would have been like in the mid-30s when the drought thing was on. Of course, I was born in 38, so I don't know much about that other than what I hear, saying that they had chickens and they had ducks and they had, sustained themselves on the farm as best they could. How they were financially, I never really heard anything saying that they were in terrible dire need of funds, but I'm sure the funds weren't all that great.
Okay. When, where, and how did your father die?
My father was visiting with a bunch of other old seniors at the local gas station where a lot of the old folks would get together for visiting in the morning. And while they were visiting, all of a sudden he just laid his head over to the side and didn't say a word anymore. So he apparently had a stroke or some sorts.
Was that in Fredonia?
That was in Fredonia, yeah.
Okay. Let's switch over to your mother. Could you tell us a little bit about her?
What I recall back, as far as I think I remember, is her having headaches. And during that period of time, they would drive to a local individual in Culm, which would do kind of like a massage therapy. And of course, when she had these terrific headaches, why they would drive to Culm, and after the massage thing, she thought she felt better. Whether she really did or not, who knows? But that got progressively worse, and this is when the trip was made to Aberdeen, and it was diagnosed, excuse me, that she had a tumor that was growing from her right side, crossing her forehead and pressing down on the optic nerves, causing her to have bad eyesight, and was getting worse. And the tumor eventually grew all the way around, started to come out the back side here. And before they went to Rochester to have this done, which was maybe about a year or two after that trip to Aberdeen was made, she spent some time at the hospital in Bismarck and some time at the state hospital in Jamestown. And it was in the fall of 1947 when the decision was made by, I don't know who, Dad, the older brothers and sisters, or I don't know who made the decision. But anyway, to go to Rochester, Minnesota to have this surgery done that this Dr. Rudolph suggested. maybe about 3 years prior or 2 years prior. And during the surgery, she never came out of it. She died in the surgery. That's about all I recall.
Okay. When and where was she born?
She was born in this country, probably in the in Grandma and Grandpa's farm home, more than likely in those days.
Okay. How did she express her emotions, such as fear, love, or anger?
Well, from what little I recall, before she started getting sick, you got to sit on her lap once in a while, and she would hug you, that kind of thing.
Let me ask you a question about your parents. How many children did they have altogether?
There was 2 girls and 3 boys.
Okay. And who was the stricter parent?
Well, mother passed away when I was only about 8 or 9 years old. So I really can't really for sure say that she was the strictest one. But from memories of what was being talked about over the years, I would say she was the strictest one.
Okay. And from your brief time when she was alive and from the memories, how would they discipline the children?
Well, you were told first, and if that didn't get to you, a swat on the hind, got your attention pretty good. So it wasn't too often that had to be done, but if it was done, you remembered it. It's not like, don't do this again.
Who influenced your life more?
I would say probably my sisters, as far as education things and so on down the line.
And how did they influence your life?
Well, number one, my second oldest sister was my first grade teacher, and she told me before school started, saying that from here on in, when you go to school, remember, this was talked in German now, remember, when you're in school, you're supposed to be talking English. Well, growing up as a kid, we always spoke German. All of a sudden, the following day, you're supposed to be talking English. That didn't go over so good. But after standing in the corner a couple of times and things of that nature, why you pretty soon you got the hang of it. That you tried to be your best to talk English.
Okay. How did your parents meet?
That I am not really so sure how that came about. From hearsay, my grandparents, who came to this country in 1909, they stayed with my grandfather's sister and her husband in Eureka the first winter. The following spring, they came to Lair, North Dakota, where they farmed for about 5 years. And then Grandpa decided, or else he found out, he wanted to homestead some ground. Apparently he found out there was ground to be homesteaded in north of Ananda, Montana. And of course they packed up lock, stock, and barrel, horses and cattle and what have you on the train and out they went. But some of my older uncles and aunts, they remembered what it was like in this part here. And when they got out to that Vananda area, that was just like a desolate area. And that wasn't too long when some of those older ones came back to these parts. And of course, my dad and Uncle John, they wound up having to serve in the Army. And when they came back to this part again. And I don't know how my dad and my mom got together, but apparently there must have been some family work or hired hands or something working in the neighborhoods, and I don't know how that came together, but they found themselves together.
How long were they married?
till 1947.
What did your parents do for their pastime?
Well, I'm sure their pastime probably is working on the farm and tending to the farm things that went on. As far as other activities, probably 4th of July, they might have gone to a city close by where there were some celebrations going on. They might have done something like that. I don't recall as being real young doing that type of thing. It was only later, after Mom had passed away, that we would do a little bit of that. Going to church on Sundays wasn't heard of.
Were your parents involved in politics when you were a child?
No.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add about your parents?
Well, I kind of wish my mom would have lived longer. Dad lived up to be 73 years old, where Mom was only 44 years old, which was kind of, hard for him and tough for us kids. Although maybe on the long run it was a good experience for us to grow up having only one parent, which is not the greatest in the world either, because you miss your parents.
All right, let's switch over to your siblings. Could you please tell us the birth order of your siblings?
Elvina was the oldest one. And then comes Annetta. And then my brother Darwin. And then comes yours truly. And then comes my baby brother, Arnie. And there were 2 stillborns. I don't know exactly what order they were, but they might have, one of them I think was right. I wonder if they weren't one before my older brother and one after my older brother. I think that's where they're at.
Okay. Could you tell us about your brothers and sisters?
Well, my sister Elvina, married to Raymond Berkeley. And my sister Annetta married his brother Roland Berkeley. And my brother Darwin married Arlene Meidinger. And my younger brother married, she's from Berlin. I should know the name right off the handle, but I don't. I'll think of that after a bit. Can't think of it. And of course I got married to Dolores, my wife. Both my sisters went to high school. And I think this is probably what prompted them more so than anything to have their brothers and go to high school as well. My older brother didn't. I went to high school, and my younger brother went to high school for 2 years, and then he went in the Army. I finished high school. My oldest sister encouraged me. She said, "You go to college. You go to college." And well, I really wasn't all that hepped up about going to school any further because I really didn't want to go to high school because it was a drag for me to get through the 8th grade. I'm not one that can learn so easily out of a book. I learn a lot by example. But I did go to high school, finished that. Then I went in the service, got out of the service, got married, and then several years later I decided to go to Northern State College in Aberdeen, which I did, finish that. So out of the 5 of us, I'm the only one that has college education.
Okay. And if you can remember, can you tell us when and where they were born?
When and where? From what I can determine, we were all born on the farm, in the farmstead where parents lived at. If there were any midwives or that kind of thing, I don't know. There might have been. Just at the top of my head, I would guesstimate that probably, who knows, maybe Grandma was serving as a midwife. I don't know for sure that. Because they were only 2 miles away.
Okay. As you were growing up, how did all the children interact with one another?
Pretty much everybody got along. We all had our little spats once in a while, but for the most part, I think we got along well.
Was there any competition in your family?
Not that I recall.
Okay. What type of mischief did any of the children get into?
Oh, golly, I don't know. Can't think of anything that we did, but I suppose we probably did something that, like most kids do. Probably just sneak somebody's candy away or something. It might have been something like that, but I don't recall that. It's a possibility we did some of those little things.
Okay.
Hide your cap or something.
Which brother or sister were you closest to?
Well, I really can't say I favored one more than the other. They were all pretty good to me, I guess.
Did any of them have any nicknames?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add about your brothers or sisters?
Well, I wish my oldest sister was still here, and my younger brother was still here with us, but there aren't. I'm sure my oldest sister could tell me a few more things about my family histories that I'm working on. As far as my mother and dad family I'm talking about now, there's things that they probably could shed some light on, which I don't know anything about. Although I have pried my second oldest sister and my older brother of things, what they remember, what mom and dad did, or what they said. And they've shared some of their things, which I've penciled down, and I've got some of that stuff in the computer, which is neat, I think.
Yes.
I always keep telling them, don't even try to think that it happened last year or the year before or whatever. If you remember, write it down, just a word or two or three. When I come by, we'll talk about these things, and then you'll remember. It doesn't have to be in chronological order. I can always put in chronological order on the computer.
All right. You mentioned earlier about going to grade school where your sister was a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I don't know when it got to my head, but I always wanted to be able to fly an airplane. And it took me, let's see, I was born in 1938. It took me till 1980, no, maybe a little early, about 1978, about 78 and 1979, when I finally achieved that mission, that I was able to pilot a plane for myself. And so my brother and I, we bought this old airplane, and we had that airplane for, I don't know, probably about 5-6 years, until we were satisfied with our flying abilities, and then we sold it. It was fun.
Where did you go to school at?
Grade school was, of course, country school. From the first grade through the fourth grade was a farm country school a mile away from the farm home. In fifth grade, of course, Mom passed away in 47. In 49, we moved to Fredonia. And then I started fifth grade in Fredonia. And I finished the eighth grade there. Fredonia did not have a high school, but Cullum did, which was about 9 miles to the east. So I finished high school in Cullum. In 1957 I finished. Graduated there.
Okay. Country school you went through first for fourth grade.
Mm-hmm.
Was this a one-room schoolhouse?
One-room schoolhouse. Actually, you could say two-room. There was a little partition for a library and a little partition where you hung your coats and overshoes and things of that nature. So, but the main place where this classes were held, you could say, is a one-room schoolhouse.
How many books were in your library?
Not many. To a child, there probably looked like a lot, but knowing how little that was, there weren't that many books in there.
Were they in English and German, or only English?
Only English.
And when you went to school in Fredonia, how big was your schoolhouse?
Well, that was a double-decker school, and The first floor was partitioned in half, and so was the second floor partitioned in half. And I think when that school was first built, there might have been, the one partition probably had from first grade to, I don't know, third grade probably. And then from third to the fifth, and then second floor was from the fifth through the seventh, and maybe the last one was probably eighth graders or something like that. But when I started in the fifth grade, there was only, the first floor was opened as one whole room. And they had from the first grade through the fourth grade there. The fifth graders through the eighth grade were up on the second floor, and that was still partitioned into two rooms. And one room was used for classes, and the other room was used for storage and things of that nature.
Okay. What was the size of how big were your classes in first through fourth grade in your country school?
Probably about 3 or 4 kids, 5 kids maybe, something like that. And weren't very many.
Okay. Were they all the same ethnicity?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We were all from the German areas, and we all spoke English once we got past the hump of knowing that English is the spoken word to be done. So.
Okay. And how big were your classes, and what ethnicity were they in Fredonia?
They were also German. Yeah, we were all German folks living in those areas. It's when you got into the column area when you had the Swedes and, well, more Swedes than Norwegians, but there were Norwegian too, but mostly Swedes. But even those folks, they all talked English.
What was the ratio of girls to boys in both of those schools?
I don't know. Didn't really pay that much attention to girls in those days, but I suppose it was probably 50-50 or close to it.
Okay. How did you get to both of those schools?
Country school from first to fourth. It was by foot. We walked. If the weather was nice, if it was ugly, rainy in the fall of the year or spring of the year, my dad would come and get us. Same thing as for the other students. Their parents came and got them and took them. In the wintertime, same thing. If the weather was halfway favorable, you walked. If it was really bad, of course, then my dad would come with the automobile, which was an old 36 Chevy, and if that road wasn't passable, why then came the bobsled and the horses.
About how long did it take you to get to school when you walked?
Well, I don't know what time we were told to get going, but we always made it there in time. I suppose to walk a mile, that didn't take too long. If you kept going, it probably was a half hour or better. Not much longer, I would say. I know my sister and I, we hiked, kept going, bundled up. Our nose, I'm sure, was cold by the time we got there, especially if it was in the wintertime.
What was attendance like in the schools?
Unless there were illnesses, of course, then somebody wouldn't be there. But for the most part, everybody was there all the time.
Did you ever have to stay after to get help with your schooling?
No.
What was your favorite memory about going to school?
Recess, of course. Especially after we could speak English, then it was easy. Prior to that, at recess time, you had to be careful because that German came out real quick like.
What types of games would you play at recess?
Oh, we played kid and ball. For the most part, it was always kid and ball. Sometimes tag. Oh, what else? Hide and go seek once in a while.
What's kid and ball?
Well, instead of a baseball, kid and ball. Softball.
Okay.
We called it kitten ball that day.
Okay. What subjects were you taught at both these schools?
Well, I'm sure it was the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. What's the fourth one? Reading, writing, arithmetic. Well, whatever it is. You know, the basics. We didn't have none of this social studies and, well, Phi Ed would be the same thing as Reese's in those days. And phonics, we had phonics, you know, had that kind of stuff.
Okay. Were you a good student, and did you have a lot of homework?
Well, I don't think I was a good student. Good student is somebody that doesn't hardly have to put any effort into it. I had to put my effort into it to get halfway decent grades. I didn't have the best grades for the most part, but you know, if I could draw a C, I was happy. B, I was really happy. And A was seldom to be seen, for me anyway. For other kids probably was, but an A was seldom to be seen. For Reese's, if they'd had grades for there, I suppose we'd have been done pretty good.
What type of homework did you have?
Well, going again back to the first to the fourth grade, I'm sure there was like arithmetic things to do, spelling. I don't recall anything like history or biology or anything like that. I don't recall anything like that, but spelling more than likely probably and arithmetic probably were the ones that were really, you know, pushed on that you got that stuff done. And probably read a small book of sorts, which you were probably quizzed on in school the next day. Well, what you know, whatever the subject matter was, what you remembered reading about it, you know.
Did your parents or siblings help you with your homework?
Well, my sisters did, especially the one that was the teacher, of course. She made sure that I got my stuff done. My older sister, she was married, of course, lived at a different farm site, and she taught school as well, but at a different school.
Okay. What books did you read at school?
Oh, golly. I'm sure I read a lot of books, but if there were books just for the heck of it reading, that for sure I can't recall of that. But, you know, history was one that I was reading, and which at the time I didn't think much of it. Couldn't care less if Hitler or whoever, you know, was doing whatever. Some of those things, you know, as a kid, that, who cares, you know.
Did you ever read books at home?
Not too often. Not too often.
Did you ever get into any trouble at school?
Oh, yeah. Especially in the first grade, when I didn't speak English. When we got caught, my friend and I, we were trying to figure out how to say threshing machine in English. And he and I were both in this old, you know, grade school. They had a barn there for horses, for some of the students that would ride horses. When I went to school, there wasn't anything of that anymore, but the barn was still there. And he and I were inside trying to figure out how to say threshing machine in English. Little did we know that my teacher, happened to be my sister, was standing outside of the door just listening. I'm sure she had a ball listening to us trying to figure out how to say threshing machine in English. Pretty soon she walked in. She says, "Boys, recess was over with for us kids who had went in school." That was one memorable experience I remember.
Go ahead.
Didn't hurt us a bit to stand in the corner either.
You mentioned your recess was cut short and standing in the corner. Were there any other types of discipline?
Not that I recall.
You mentioned getting caught speaking German and how it was looked down upon to speak German. Was it hard to learn English?
I suppose at that time, when you don't hardly know anything in English, it was tough, you know, to get accustomed to it. But I'm sure as a kid, you know, you catch on quick. And I'm sure that didn't take us too long. Probably maybe a couple, 3 or 4 months. Chances are that we were probably pretty well on our way, that we didn't make any mistakes and speak German, But when you were at home, you still talk to mom and dad in German.
You mentioned getting caught at recess talking German. Did a lot of people speak German during recess secretly?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And what was the punishment if you got caught?
Well, your recess was curtailed, and chances are, if whatever time was left for recess, you were called into the schoolroom, and you had to stand in the corner. And then pretty soon, when recess was over with, then you got your chance to sit back in your desk again. I mean, it was very minimal, when you think about it. When you're a kid, that was a great affair.
All right, we talked about grade school. Let's go to high school now. Can you tell us about some of your experiences in high school?
Well, it seemed like it was tougher than grade school. And of course, that was normal because, you're furthering yourself along in the education field. It was tough, And like I mentioned earlier, I wasn't a good student that could read through something and remember it for a test the following day, practically word for word. That was not me. That wasn't me. But I made it. I took the courses that were required and got that done. I remember one incident, my sister, the oldest one, she said, when you start high school, you make sure that you take typing, because that is the coming thing. Take typing. Well, I made sure I did that, and of course I still do it today.
How old were you when you started high school?
Oh boy. Well, you figure from 1938 till you had you graduated in 57, you can backtrack from that. So 53? I don't know. Do the calculations. I can't figure it out that quick.
We'll figure it out later.
Yeah, figure it out later. I suppose about 15, 14, 15, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay. You went to high school in Culm.
That's right.
And you still
Lived in Fredonia.
Fredonia. Did you have to board in town when you went to high school? Or did
No,
you go
we drove back and forth. We kind of got the bunch together that went to high school, and one family, had a individual that was old enough and licensed to drive, so we'd all pile on that particular car and we'd go to Culm to high school that week. The following week was another family, and so we always changed around. So we did that for 4 years.
About how far is that in between those two towns?
About 9 miles. And there was gravel road. There were days when it was dustier in the car than it was outside when you were driving. So old cars weren't old airtight. No air conditioning.
What type of classes did you take when you got to high school, besides typing?
Well, there was history and political science, I think, was one. What else? Art, I think we had to take. English. There was a bunch of them. Whatever was required. Math, I think, was another one. Bookkeeping I took.
What was your school like then, with class size and teacher to student ratio, things like that?
Well, in high school, there the classes were in the neighborhood of, I suppose, anywhere from 20 to 30 students. Our class was 26, I believe. I think the freshman year started out with something like around about 30 or 31. But, after their first few months went by, a few of them dropped out for whatever reason, I don't know. But We graduated with I believe it was 26 of them we graduated.
Okay.
Celebrated our 50th graduation anniversary last summer, 57.
What was the composition of the population like there, girls to boys and ethnicity?
Well, the girls and boys, I suppose I think we had a few more girls than we had boys. Not many more, but a few more, I would say. I would say the majority of them were probably of the German descent, and probably half a dozen or so, well, maybe less than that, half a dozen or so of Swedes.
And did the teachers treat students of different ethnicities any different?
No, I don't think so.
What was the attendance like in high school?
I would say it was, for the most part, I would say it was pretty good. Again, there too, if somebody was sick, of course, they stayed home. But for the most part, I don't think anybody really played any hookies or, stayed home on purpose or whatever, or did something else. I don't think there was anybody like that. At least I wasn't aware of it if it was going on.
Were students ever held out of class to help with farm work?
Some were. Some were. In fact, I did some of that, especially in the fall of the year during harvest. And there too, in my case, my brother-in-law, married to my oldest sister, he would visit with the teachers and the principals and superintendents and stuff like that and say, so and so day, whatever, if it's the weather's nice harvesting, he's not going to be in school because he's going to be out there helping me. So everything worked. I don't know if he had to pay him off or what. I don't know, but.
Did you participate in any school activities such as sports?
Football, basketball, no. Well, I suppose, could you consider band an activity? Yeah, I did that. Did that for 4 years. Played the bass horn.
What type of football did you play? Was it 8-man or was it full?
9-man.
9-man.
Yeah. And I played on the left end.
How many area high schools did you play?
Oh God, probably about a half a dozen or more. We didn't go as far as the kids do today. Like here from Ashley, they travel all the way up to Goodrich and out west to Beulah and Fort Yates and different places like that. We didn't do that. Ours was more local. Okay. We had Cullum, of course, being high school. We had Edgeley, Lemoore, Allendale, Gackle, once in a while, Ashley, Lair, Wajick, locally. Within, 50, 75 miles, I suppose, something like that.
Okay. How would a student be disciplined in high school if they got into trouble?
Got sent to the principal's office. And I never did, but whoever got sent there, whatever went on, I don't know, but eventually the man came back, or the girl came back, red-faced and whatever, so I suppose they got a tongue lashing of sorts.
Did your high school have pep rallies or any dances?
There were some of that, yeah. I never participated in any of that.
What's your favorite memory from your high school years?
I think they were all favorable, but I don't know which one you would pick on. I don't know, for the most part, I had fun with everybody else, and nothing that really stands out of any great importance. Probably the class prom, or the high school prom, when you get to be a senior. That might be one of those.
Okay. Is there anything else about high school that you'd like to share with us?
Oh, golly. I don't know. I think that's about all I've got that I can think of.
All right, let's move to some youth activities. I understand that you were an avid stamp collector in your youth.
Oh yeah, I got started with that back in grade school days. Probably about the 7th or 8th grade area. Got started with that. There's a couple of two or three of us kids in the grade school in Fredonia that were involved doing stamp collecting. And so, of course, you had to follow the crowd, so I did some of that as well. Did some stamp collecting.
And where did you get these stamps from?
They were ordered, like say, here's a Zenith stamp company. And there were other stamp companies that we would send in a few cents and, get 10 or 15 stamps of sorts. And you always had a little selection, some German, some Czechoslovakia, something else, whatever. And so we did that. It was kind of a fun thing. We compared our notes and had fun with it.
All right. And did you get to pick what stamps came, or did they just come?
No, they had a deal where they called it packet A, packet B, packet C or something, and then they had different prices on them. And of course, you wrote down what packet you wanted, and you send them these X many pennies or dollars or whatever it was, and a week or two later, all of a sudden, here comes your envelope with stamps in it. So.
Okay. And where did you get the money to buy these stamps?
Well, it was just allowance, that we had. Being I was going to grade school, and I would work for my brother-in-law and sister during the summertime, so I had a few dollars saved up. So, that's where some of the money came from.
Okay. What other types of pastime or activities did you have as a youth?
A few of us kids in grade school, Fredonia, when we were in town, we play canasta was one thing that we played a lot of. Either at my parents' place or at the other parents' place, we played cards. Sometimes a bunch of us kids would get together at the local restaurant and we would play canasta there too. But canasta for us was kind of the main thing. There was a few other ones that played other card games, which I never really learned how to play them. But canasta, I knew how to play that.
What were some of your favorite radio programs?
Oh, Fibber McGee and Molly was one. Whitey Larson from the Yankton, he had good music on in the evening.
What type of music would he play?
Well, there was like polka music, waltzes, and things of that nature.
Did you ever get any German language radio programs, or were they all English?
No, at that time there was all English stuff.
Did you go to the movies at all?
When I went to high school, we went to the movies, yeah.
And what type of movies did you see there?
Whatever was available. You didn't have too much choice. There was either this one or none, Okay. If it sounded like it was a good movie, you went to the movie. If you didn't, why, that was, you stayed home and did something else.
Okay.
During the week, very seldom did you ever go to a movie, but on weekends.
Let's move over to farm life. Can you describe the homestead or farmstead you grew up on?
Okay, the homestead that I grew up on, as far as trees or shelter belts, we didn't have anything like that. The house was a fairly large house, square, a two-story house. In today's age, that'd probably be a little small cracker box, but to me at that time, that was a large house. We had two barns. Why one of them was called a horse barn, I don't know, because they were both shaped the same. But anyway, the one which they always said the horse barn, my dad always kept like hogs in it during the winter on some of the lean-tos, and in the other lean-to, the chickens roosted during the winter. The other barn, shaped the same way. Dad kept the cattle in there and the horses. And one of the lean-tos contained the small calves, and the other side of the lean-to contained the oats and the ground feed and things of that nature. And of course the hay mound had the hay on it.
Okay. Did you have any other animals on your farm besides those ones you just mentioned?
Well, there were pigs and sheep. We didn't have any sheep, but had pigs, had ducks, geese, chickens.
Okay. Where was the closest town to your farmstead?
About 8 miles, which was Fredonia. And everything went good when the roads weren't blocked with snow.
Did you ever have the roads get blocked by snow and experience a couple weeks of isolation?
Oh yes, often, quite often. I remember many incidents during the winter when farmers, which lived west of us even, they would come with their horses and either trailers, like a four-wheel trailer, or a bobsled. If there was enough snow, there was bobsleds. They would come, and being if it was bobsled, they would not necessarily be on the road. They would go cross country, the fields, the pastures, and that type of thing. And when they got closer to town, a little bit better modern road, of course, chances are maybe that road was not blocked and it was gravel, so they had to go in the ditch with the bobsleds. But those that were with wagons, of course, they were on the road.
How did your family gain possession of the land?
They bought that. They bought that. And I'm almost sure that Grandpa on my mother's side probably helped financially to make the down payment and, get going like that.
And do you know how many acres were initially bought?
160 acres.
You mentioned cows and pigs and chickens and things like that. Did your family ever butcher these animals?
A hog was butchered periodically, and probably one of the cattle, a steer probably, when the weight was whatever weight they wanted them to be, they would butcher one of those. The thing with butchering the things was, refrigeration service, there was none on the farm. So whenever the butchering was done, and however they packaged it, then they had to take it to in this particular case, it was either Gackle, which had a locker plant, or Cullum, which had a locker plant. And there they would rent these boxes and put the stuff in there and freeze it. It's like a walk-in freezer type of a thing.
Did your family ever make any sausage out
Oh,
of
yeah.
butchered?
Oh yes, I remember a lot of that stuff. Especially when hog butchering thing came along. They probably butchered, well, usually neighbors got together. They probably butchered 3 or 4 of them. And then sausage was made and rendered the lard and all kinds of things. Used everything but the squeal and the tail.
Could you describe the sausage making process for us?
Well, they would, cut up the meat in small enough pieces so that they could run it through a meat grinder. And in some of the cases, very early cases, I remember a meat grinder that they would crank by hand. And that was only about once or twice that I recall that. A year or two later, there was a fellow that hooked up a pulley of sorts onto this grinder, and then they would run it with an electric. No, it wouldn't have been electric because we didn't have electricity. It would have been with a gas engine of sorts, and that would crank the grinder. And of course, all they'd have to do was feed the cut meat into it, and once it was cut, ground up the way they wanted it, then they mixed their seasoning in it. Salt, pepper, garlic, whatever they added to it. And then that mixture then was put into a sausage stuffer, and which probably was maybe 1.5 gallon or 2 gallon sausage stuffer. So, they would open the top up and they'd fill this with sausage, slide it across again, and then they would put the casings on the bottom end of a spigot that came out. And when they would crank this would push this thing down and force the sausage meat into this casing. See, of course, when the casings were filled and if the sausage stuffer was empty, the process started over again. Open it up and fill it some more, whatever, until they were done. And then if you wanted it smoked, then it had to go to a smokehouse and smoke it. And a lot of that stuff was done too. They smoked the sausages and they smoked the hams. Some of it was cured in salt. Bacon was cured in smoke, some salted. Yeah.
And these smokehouses, did your family do that, or was that?
On our farm, we had a smokehouse, and that was kind of a makeshift thing that came off off of a small building. It was a roof, and I don't know what happened to the building, but whatever, the roof was used, and that was set on the ground. I don't think from the ground to the peak of the roof probably was, I don't know, probably stretching it. It was probably 5 feet at the most. And I remember inside there were sticks crossing, and they would hang these sausages in there. And then there was a pit where they put whatever they used, wood, some kind of wood apparently, to get the right kind of smell from the for the sausage. That was burned in there, then, see. And once they had that fire lit, well, then they closed the doors, and this thing would, keep smoking in there. So.
You mentioned the roads closed periodically during winter.
Yep.
Could you describe the roads to your house, to your farm?
Well, to our farm from town, the Highway 56, which runs between Fredonia and Gackle, was usually a pretty good road. And they had road maintenance on there with the county, well, it would have been the state road. They had state trucks with plows on them and rotary plows if it needed be. But then off of that road, we had to travel another 3 miles to get to the farmstead. And that road wasn't all that great. It had deep ditches. It was just carved out, deep ditches. No attention was paid to the hills, which would be as such that it would catch the snow and drop it right on the road with the wind blowing it. And so those places were plugged up good at once in a while, maybe 4 feet, 5, 10 feet, depends on the blizzard. And a lot of times the farmers would get together, they'd scoop it out by shovel. 2 days later, a snowstorm came along, plugged it right back up again. See, so some of these places were tough to get. And then they would, once they gave up on it, then they would get off the road at a different approach someplace, and then they would go across a stubble field or a pasture or something to get to town. And there was nothing to see a car go by with chains on all the time until they got to a certain point on Highway 56 probably, and then they take the chains off and go the rest of the way to town. And back home, before you get off that main road, put the chains back on again. Struggle through the stubble field and pastures till you got home again.
Okay. What type of farming equipment did your family have?
We had several pieces of equipment. Tractors, for instance, we had a little A. McCormick. We had an H International, and we had another International that was the largest one, which was called a 2236, which is equivalent to present days probably a W9 International tractor on that order. When you say 2236, that don't ring too much to anybody's rings today's age, but a 2236 was like a W9 International roughly. The one, we didn't have one, but the neighbor had one which was just a little smaller than that. That was called a 1530, which was equivalent to about like a W6 International tractor.
Okay.
The little A, he would pull a 2-bottom plow, the H would pull a 3-bottom plow, and this 2236 was a 4-bottom plow with pony drum. He was strong enough for that.
Did you ever have threshing crews come to your farm?
Oh yes, early on I recall a few where threshing crews came to the yard. Yeah.
And did you have a bunch of neighbors come together?
Oh yes, there was always a bunch of them that, neighbors came together with their, well, they call them bundle wagons, which is a wagon with like a hay rack thing on it. And they would haul the bundles from every end of the field to about the middle of the area where the threshing machine was set up at. Yeah, generally there probably were at least, oh, I don't know, just taking a guess, at least six horse rigs and maybe even 8, that would haul bundles in from the outskirts of the field to the middle.
Okay.
And that was kind of a trying experience for some of those horses. I recall one incident where, and I didn't actually see it happen, but the thresher people talked about it. If you were on the side of the threshing machine where the drive belt was on that came from the tractor to the machine, somebody's horse was wagging his tail, I suppose, trying to knock flies off. His tail got caught on that main drive pulley, and they say that it wrapped it around and literally ripped the horse's tail out. So that side of the machine was bad. The other side was much safer to be on. So, but I didn't get involved in pitching any bundles or doing that. The only bundling thing I was involved in was setting up some bundles. After the binder was through doing his work.
Did you have big dinners after the days were done?
There were, yes. Yeah. I recall noontime. Usually the women of the family farm they brought the lunch out to the threshers. In the evening time, they had the suppers at home in the house. That was usually a grueling, I don't know, 4 or 5 days a week, maybe something like that, till that whole business was over with, and everybody sighed a sigh of relief when that was finished.
Could you please describe the fields and crops on your family farm?
Well, the fields, other than the pastures, of course, the fields, there was, my dad, he seeded oats and barley and wheat, flax, a variety of things. Seeded that, and for the most part the crops are fairly good, as I recall, but I also recall them talking about the dirty 30s where hardly anything grew.
Do you remember your neighbors at all?
Not much, no.
Okay. Do you remember at all how close they lived to your farm?
The closest one was about 1.5 miles. In fact, if they did go to there, which I don't know if they did, they probably did, they would have had to go past the school where we went to school, and then beyond the school is where those farmers lived at.
Okay. Was neighboring a common practice when you were growing up?
I recall some of that, yeah. Yeah, I recall some of that.